My dad drove a truck between Edinburgh and London and tells the story often. He was driving down the motorway and looked to his right, and he saw a woman with a Miss Trunchbull bun, as he would describe it, staring at him with a terrified expression from a car next to him. Before he really knows how to react, the car pulls off at an exit, and my dad, although shaken, carries on. About a half an hour later, a different car with a different driver pulls alongside my dad, with the same woman in the passenger seat, with the same expression on her face. My dad thinks, fuck this, and plans to pull into the next service to report it, as even if it's nothing or a misunderstanding, it's better to be safe than sorry, right? Anyways, the car disappears before he can get any details, plates, etc. And he thinks there is no point in calling the police with no details, so he carries on driving. Literally about 4 hours later, almost in London, yet another car pulls alongside him with the same woman. Same Miss Trunchbull hair, same terrified expression. Except this time, she appears to be screaming at my dad through the window. So my dad pulls over into the lobby and calls the police. Apparently, they have received 3 other calls about the same woman and the car in the same area in the last few minutes. It is unfortunately anticlimactic, as he never heard anything more about it, but he didn't see her again, and although he kept an eye on the news, he also didn't see anything about it. Hopefully it's just a giant coincidence. Not a trucker, but I had a college teammate from Miami tell a story that he swears on to this day. He and his girlfriend were making the drive to Annapolis late night on a 2-lane road through the Everglades, and had been in a line of cars behind an 18-wheeler for multiple miles. She fell asleep and he was surfing for something to listen to on the radio. Only one station came in clearly enough to be tolerable, so he gave it a listen. The DJ came on and said something along the lines of, "Stars are extra bright in the Everglades tonight. If you're driving through here, pull off and take a look." He said he normally wouldn't even think of it, but for some reason, he just felt compelled to that night. He woke up his girlfriend. She was annoyed and didn't want to, but he convinced her it would be worth it. They stopped and just took in the stars for 5 to 10 minutes. He said it was the most amazing skies he's ever seen. Then, they get back on the road and drive another few minutes and come across a massive accident. The truck they were following had jackknifed and took out several of the vehicles that were following. He said there were multiple fatalities, but I've never been able to find a story about it to confirm. It probably would have been around 2005 or somewhere around there. They most likely would have been involved if not for that random DJ on the only radio station to come in that night. Around 2006, I was driving a flatbed, picked up a load of construction material, drywall, roofing, don't remember, but it was in prepackaged boxes, and I always remember having to use strap protectors on the load in rural Tennessee. The memory's foggy now, but I want to say it was between Memphis and Nashville, but closer to the intersection of Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee state lines. A tarp was required, so I strapped everything down, tarped the load, and left the shipper. About 5 miles down the road, in the middle of nowhere woods, on a 2-lane road, I noticed my tarp flapping in the wind. Found a wide shoulder and pulled over to fix it. I realized that I would just flat out did a shitty job tarping the load, and decided to redo it on the side of the road. Undo all the bungee straps, drag the tarps off, roll them back up, climb up on the load, and start unrolling the tarps again. And I see a guy walking down the same side of the road I'm on, coming towards my truck. I don't think anything about it other than to keep an eye on him because I'm in the middle of nowhere, and I just continue doing what I'm doing. About the time I have the tarp set in place, and I'm climbing down to start hooking the bungee straps back on, this dude is getting close enough that I'm now paying more attention to him than I am tarping my load. I grab my winch bar and set it on the trailer where I'm working just in case. It's an 8-pound solid metal bar, and about 4 feet long, tapered to a blunt point on one, and hollow on the other, used for tightening straps and chains, etc. The guy gets to me, and the first thing I notice is his hair. It's like a mullet, but it's patchy as fuck. Like, he tried to cut his own hair and had a seizure in the process and said, "Fuck it, good enough to party." The next thing I noticed were his eyes, which I can only describe as off. Like, they were clear. I didn't think he was drunk or high or anything, but it also gave me the distinct impression that the elevator just didn't go all the way up. His clothes were dirty and not well maintained, with dirty white tennis shoes, because I remember he didn't have laces on winch shoes and the tug was noticeably out of place. He stops by me, waits until I acknowledge him, and just says, "I've got a long walk." I'm like, "Yeah man, you do. We're in the middle of nowhere," making it clear there's no ride to be had here. He nods, starts walking by me and continuing on his way, stops at about the driver door of my truck and turns around, comes back to me and repeats himself. "I've got a long walk." At this point I explained that I can't give him a ride, insurance and all that, apologize for not being able to help him out, and he seems to accept this, turns around and leaves. I wait for him to get a little ways away from my truck and start working on finishing the tarp job. I still keep an eye on him and he's moving away from me. As I'm putting on the last of the bungee straps, I look over to check where he's at and he's turned around heading back towards me. Now about 100 yards in front of my truck and coming back my way. It looked like he's talking on a cell phone, has his hand up to his face and I can barely make out his mouth moving. His other hand waving like he's having a conversation with someone. I finish the straps, grab my winch bar and I'm climbing into my truck as he's about 10 yards away. Soon as I'm in the cab, I lock the doors, set the winch bar on the passenger seat just in case. I look at the guy and realize he's not talking on a phone. He's talking to his fucking hand and now I'm nervous, because he doesn't look like he's having a nice pleasant chat. It looks more like an angry conversation. Crank the trunk up, put it in gear, and just pull out. Didn't look for traffic or anything. As I pass him, he's just looking at me, still holding his hand to his face with this dead ass look on his face, just staring at me. Gave me the creeps. About the time I hit 5th or 6th gear, I look in the mirror and there's no one there. Not a truck driver, but I've spent the last 4 years driving every day or night for work. I was in a fairly rural part of Mississippi, somewhere between Clarksdale and Greenwood. Important note, it's all 2-lane highway, the 250-mile drive home. The weather had turned pretty sour as I was leaving Clarksdale. I called my wife, told her there was high wind advisories and very possible tornado threats throughout the Delta, and I'd call her as soon as I made it to a safe area again. I had already been working for 14 hours when I got in the truck, so I had ate dinner and grabbed some coffee to stay awake and alert. Now, if you've never driven through flat farmland at night for 100 miles, it's very fatiguing and spooky without inclement weather. I had driven maybe 30 miles out into the farmland when hail started bouncing off my truck. Being a Mississippi native, I knew in July hail meant tornado. I pull off to the side. I'm in the middle of nowhere, with no lights to be seen, no cars behind or in front of me. I start looking for the storm or tornado I believe is approaching. I roll the passenger window down and shine the bright flashlight off into the night. Nothing there. Turn to the passenger side and this guy has his face pushed against the glass, grinning from ear to ear. I screamed and he was gone. I slammed the truck in drive and took off. We have cameras running all the time on our trucks. I got to the first safe place to stop and called my wife. I didn't want to scare her, so I didn't mention the guy or the hailstorm. I did, however, pull out the SD card and check the cameras. I promise you the guy never popped up on my front or rear camera. I've always played it off as my imagination. I will say I don't drive through the Delta in the dark anymore, if I don't absolutely have to. I'm not a truck driver, but the story comes from a truck driver himself. I was working the overnight shift from Friday night into Saturday morning at the gas station. At about 6 a.m., a semi pulls into the fuel aisle. Driver gets out and almost runs into the store, clearly shaken. His face is completely white and he is obviously upset. My first thought was that the poor man had hit someone on the road. We get a lot of drunks walking across the 4-lane highway in the front of the store. So I asked what's wrong. He looks at me for a second and is like, "I'm not crazy." Now I'm thinking, great, I'm here all alone and this guy is losing it. I say, "Of course not. I just saw something huge on the side of the road." "Like a deer or bear?" We had a bear get in the dumpster last week. No. Bigger than a bear on its hind legs. Maybe a big person? I picked up a dead buck on the side of the road and carried it over his shoulder into the woods. I can only stare at him. My brain cannot deal with this information this late in the shift. A local comes up to the counter to get as usual, and the guy tells him the story. And the local says, "Oh yeah, that's just a Bigfoot that lives near the county line." The truck driver and I are both looking at this guy like he had two heads. He has to be joking. This trucker pays for his fuel at a record speed and leaves never to be seen again. The local still insists it's Bigfoot. I just don't go in the woods because I don't know.